Hi everyone, it's Lucy from My Crazy Craft Life, and I'm here today with a design team post for Fairy Stamper. Today I'm going to be creating this card. I'm going to be using quite a few stamps. I'm using Treasure, Moana, Rocks, Melia, Bluebells, the small flower from Bluebells, and Whimsical flower cluster to create the stamp. I'm going to start out by stamping the two fairy images, the smaller one and the larger one, and I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink to do that. And I'm going to use the platform one to make sure that it stays in place where I want it to go. And I position this all the way in the corner on both sides to make sure that in case it does move a little, because I don't know what's going on with my magnets, but they are not really holding it down. But these are also really solid stamps, so it's pulling them up. But I want to make sure that I can stamp it a few times so that I can get a really solid, nice, crisp image with these fairies. After I finish stamping these, I am going to cut them out using my brother's Scan and Cut. And then I will do some coloring on them and whatnot as well. Now I'm going to start making the background piece that I'm using. So normally I would stamp these directly onto the background, but I wanted to do this one just a little bit different. So I'm using the rock and I'm kind of placing everything where it's going to go. Now I will stamp the rock in the place that I want it to go and how I kind of want it to be positioned. So that's really what I'm doing there, is just kind of piecing it together and figuring out exactly how I want it to be placed on the background. Now the sentiment I'll stamp later because I want to make sure again that that's nice and dark and crisp when I stamp it. So I'm going to be using some Distress Oxides, and I will stamp the sentiment after that. So I finish up with the rock, and then I am going to do this to both of the images of the fairies. So when you cut it out with the Scan and Cut, sometimes you have a slight edge. I do it all the way to the edge of the image so I don't leave a border around them. And sometimes you'll have a little white line that's left over. So I'm just taking a black Sharpie marker and coloring over that line so that you don't have that kind of white border on some of it, but not all of it. So it's going to all just be a solid black image. And then, like I said, I am going to use some Distress Oxides to do the background for the background panel for this card. Now the colors I'm using of the Distress Oxides are Antique Linen, Iced Spruce, Vintage Photo, Walnut Stain, Picked Raspberry, Wilted Violet, Worn Lipstick, Dusty Concord, and Candy Apple. And I'm using the browns for like the ground, the Walnut Stain, which is a little bit darker, I'll put under the rock for some shading. And then I'm using the Iced Spruce for the rock. Then I'm going to use the Antique Linen to kind of create that sun there, and then I'm just going to have the other colors kind of going around it, starting off with the lighter ones. So I started out with Worn Lipstick, and then I'll continue with the Picked Raspberries, go to the Candied Apple, go to the Dusty Concord, and then the Wilted Violet. And after I get all of the color on there, I'm just going to keep blending. So even though I have like all the colors on there, and sometimes I think this is what you look at and people think that they can't do the ink blending because they kind of look at it and it kind of looks not exactly blended. And the thing I think a lot of people don't realize is that you can go back and keep moving that color around for a while because it will stay wet for quite some time. Now this time I did hold on to just a scrap piece of paper so that I don't get my fingerprints in the background, which I tend to do sometimes because I don't think about grabbing a piece of cardstock or scrap paper so that it blocks it. But you just want to keep moving it around. So not necessarily that you'll be adding more, and maybe you can add a little bit more as you're going, but the big thing is just to keep moving it around and blend those colors together, and that's kind of how you'll get those blended backgrounds. I then just took some water and splashed it on there, and then just took a towel to blot it off to give it a little more of that distressed look, give it some dimension, some focal points. And now I'm going to add the sentiment, and again I'm using the VersaFine Onyx Black ink to do that. I did with the water, you can either let it dry, or I used the heat gun for a few seconds just to dry it quicker. And then I went and took the images because I was going to use some alcohol markers and color in the wings. And for the smaller fairy, I used pinks, and then for the larger fairy, I used turquoise colors just for their wings. And my whole thought on this, I'm using the sentiment, "You are my treasure," and I thought it was cute to have, like, it was like a mother and a daughter fairy having a conversation, and the mother telling her how important she was, or something to that effect. That's kind of where my mind was going when I was creating this. And I thought it was fun to have them leaning on that rock, and the little fairy kneeling on it in front of the larger fairy, just like having a conversation. So I just thought that was a lot of fun. Now, what I did with this coloring was I really didn't blend anything with the alcohol markers. I just used the darker ones in the lower sections. I used lighter ones in the middle section, and then the lightest shade I used on the top sections. And then I did take my scissors just to cut out a couple pieces that I wanted to just remove, because they were kind of easy, not for the scan and cut machine to cut out, but for me to cut out, just to give it a little more definition even. Then in the parts that were still white that you could see that I wasn't going to cut out, I just used a yellow alcohol marker just to kind of fill that in so it wasn't the stark white. Then I'm going to take the Bluebell and the flower cluster and pop that onto the background right in front of the stone or the rock, just because I think that there's flowers a lot of times in front of rocks like that, especially large ones that are there for extended periods of time. So I thought that was kind of a fun little accent to add on to that to kind of complete the look of it. So after I finish stamping on these flowers, I am going to grab my Wink of Stella pen and use that on the fairy's wings for both the large and the small fairy, to kind of give them that glitter sparkly look. And here I'm just going to adhere the background. Now this is an A2 size card, so it's 4.25 by 5.5 inches is the card base, and I decided to use a black card base. And the background panel I only cut down 1/8 of an inch difference. So it has a very, very small thin border around it, just kind of highlighting that black around it. And there I'm just going to put the Wink of Stella all around the fairy's wings on both fairies. I am also going to use some Shimmer Spray that is clear on the entire card in a moment. Once I kind of finish this up, I take it off to spray it with the Shimmer Spray. And then I'm going to use a couple sequins, 3 to be exact, all around the sentiment. Now, when I started putting this down, I was using the tape runner, and then I decided that liquid glue would be easier because I didn't want any of the pieces getting snagged on something, so I wanted to make sure they were really kind of stuck down there. So I ended up using liquid glue on both fairies. And then, like I said, I used the sequins around the sentiment just for that little added accent. So while I'm finishing up this card, I want to thank everybody for joining me. Make sure you subscribe to Fairy Stamper. I will list all of the products and the links for the stamps in the description below, so you can check that out. Make sure you subscribe to Fairy Stamper, and if you'd like to see anything else in these videos, let us know, and we will be glad to try to get that out there to you. So again, thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoy this. Take care, and have a great day.